If you saw a Focke-Wulf Fw coming straight at you in 1944, you didn't wonder who was flying it. You aimed. That is the problem with war in the sky. It trains good men to react before they can think. A silhouette. A split second. A trigger squeezed in the name of survival. And sometimes, the difference between hero and enemy is nothing more than the pain on the wings. This story begins with a pilot who had already used up his luck. He had been part of a morning mission, routine on paper, deadly in the air. The kind of flight where the cold climbs into your gloves, where the engine's steady roar becomes your only comfort. And then, without warning, the world around him turned violent and loud. The sky filled with black bursts. The aircraft shuddered. The engine stumbled. He watched the needle fall, tried to coax it back with every trick he knew, and felt that terrible moment when a machine stops listening. When the propeller slowed, time changed. The cockpit became a small, rattling box of wind and fear. The ground rose patiently, as if it had all day. He picked a field and brought the aircraft down hard, sliding through wet earth until the plane stopped like it had been grabbed by the ankle. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even breathe right away. Because landing behind enemy lines isn't the end of a mission. It's the beginning of a hunt. He ran before anyone could arrive. Through brush. Over ditches. Past farmhouses that looked peaceful from the air and dangerous up close. He stayed off roads. He drank from a shallow stream. He listened to distant engines and froze whenever the wind carried voices. By late afternoon, the rain had found him. It soaked his uniform, flattened his hair, and turned every step into a sound he couldn't afford. His compass was gone. His map, if it could be called that, was nothing but a torn corner of briefing paper with a few lines drawn in pencil. Home was a direction, not a destination. Then, as the daylight thinned, he saw something that made his blood run cold. An airstrip. Not a grand base with towers and rows of hangars, just a forward field carved into the countryside, hidden by trees and netting. A place built to launch trouble quickly, then disappear again. He lay in the grass and watched it the way a starving man watches a kitchen window. Men moved between aircraft. A truck idled. A mechanic bent over an engine cowling, shoulders hunched against the drizzle. No alarms. No frantic search parties. Just the quiet labor of keeping fighters ready. And under a sagging camouflage net sat the shape that had chased his squadron more than once. Short nose. Broad wings. Aggressive stance, like it was ready to leap even while parked. A Focke-Wulf Fw. He had seen what that aircraft could do when it came out of the sun. He had seen bombers peel away, smoking, after a single pass. He had heard pilots describe it with the kind of respect you don't give to many things in war. Now it sat there like a locked door with the key still in it. The idea arrived in his mind the way dangerous ideas always do, quietly, and then all at once. If he could get that fighter into the air, he could cross the front in minutes. No checkpoints. No patrols. No long nights crawling through mud. He could steal back his life at the speed of an engine built for the enemy. But there was a price. To everyone who saw him, every lookout, every gun crew, every nervous pilot in a patrol, you wouldn't be a man trying to go home. He would be a Fw. And in the old war, that was enough to make friends become the most immediate threat of all. He waited until the mechanic disappeared behind a shed. Then he moved. Fast. Low. Silent. He slipped under the netting, climbed onto the wing, and stared into a cockpit labeled in a language he didn't speak. He didn't have time to understand it. He only had time to make it work. His hands found levers by logic, not certainty. Switches. Throttle. Starter. The engine turned once. Twice. Then it caught. A deep radial roar punched through the evening like a siren. Heads snapped up across the airstrip. Someone shouted. Boots began to run. And as the Fw started rolling, the pilot understood the cruelest part of his plan. Getting airborne wasn't the hard part. The hard part would be convincing his own side not to destroy him the moment they saw what he was flying. The Fw lifted off like it had been waiting for him. The runway fell away, the trees dropped beneath his wings, and for a brief moment he felt the most dangerous feeling a man can have in wartime, hope. Not the soft kind. The sharp kind that makes you careless. He forced it down. He stayed low, skimming the countryside so close he could see puddles in the ruts of farm roads. He didn't want to be seen by anyone who had time to think. He wanted to be just another shadow moving too fast to identify. But war has eyes everywhere. The first sign came as a glint high above him, two fighters cutting across the sky, working a lazy search pattern. They weren't enemy. He could tell by the way they moved, by the comfortable spacing, by the fact that they weren't diving on him immediately. They were friendly patrol. And friendly patrols were trained to kill what he was flying. He tightened his grip on the stick and tried to angle away, but the FW-190's silhouette betrayed him. One of the fighters banked. Then the other. Their wings flashed, and they started down. Not a question. A decision. He had no radio he trusted. Even if he did, the first words out of his mouth would sound like a trap. Anyone can say friendly through static. Anyone can lie. So he did the only thing he could do. He rocked his wings hard and deliberate, like a man waving both arms from a burning roof. The fighters didn't break off. They tightened their turn. They were close enough now that he could see the dark shapes of their canopies, the cold purpose in their approach. He imagined the pilot inside, seeing the FW-190's stubby nose and wide wings, remembering friends who didn't come home after meeting that aircraft. A burst snapped behind him. Tracers. Not aimed to hit, yet. A warning line in the air, a test. Are you going to run? Are you going to fight? His stomach turned to ice. If he accelerated, they'd assume he was attacking. If he climbed, he'd silhouette against the sky and draw ground fire. If he turned toward them, it would look like he was setting up a pass. He needed to show surrender without becoming an easy target. He cracked the canopy open. Wind exploded into the cockpit, tearing at his scarf and making his eyes water. He wanted them to see him, to see a human face instead of a machine. He raised one hand briefly from the controls, a gesture so reckless it felt like madness, then gripped again before the FW-190 could roll. The fighters slid closer, still behind, still cautious, like wolves circling something that might bite. Another burst. Closer. He flinched, then forced himself to fly straight. Not for long. Just long enough to say, "I'm not here to fight." Ahead, the landscape changed subtly. The hedgerows were different. The roads cut at familiar angles. The fields looked like the ones from his training flights. Home territory. And that's when the second trap revealed itself. A line of anti-aircraft positions sat along a ridge near the front, guns built to fire on anything that crossed low and fast. He saw them as tiny dark shapes, barrels angling upward. He could almost hear the shouts below, the frantic pointing, the split-second calculations of men whose job was to stop exactly what he looked like. A FW-190 slipping over the line. He rocked his wings again, violently, then dropped the gear. The landing wheel slammed down with a heavy clunk. He hoped the sound carried through the air like a plea. He wanted it to be unmistakable. "I'm coming in. I'm not attacking." For a heartbeat, the guns below hesitated. Then a searchlight snapped on and found him, pinning him in white. The beam didn't just illuminate the aircraft, it made him a target for every rifle, every machine gun, every nervous trigger finger in the valley. The first tracers rose. They didn't hit, but they were close enough to make the air feel sharp. He could see the orange arcs climbing toward him like thrown sparks. He dipped lower, almost scraping the treetops, fighting the urge to yank the stick and run. If he ran, he would be confirming the worst fear of everyone watching. If he stayed, he might not survive long enough to land. He picked an airfield ahead of one of theirs, the nearest strip that could take him before the gunners found their range. He lined up, steady hands on a trembling machine, and committed to the most dangerous approach of his life. Because now the enemy behind him was fading. And the threat in front of him wore his own uniform. He could already see men sprinting across the runway, trucks rolling into position, weapons being raised. He aimed the stolen FW-190 toward the strip anyway. And prayed that the first rounds fired at him would be warnings, not verdicts. The runway rushed up at him like a judgment. He held the FW-190 steady, fighting the aircraft's impatience, fighting his own nerves, fighting the simple truth that every man below had a reason to fire. On the ground, shapes scattered, crewmen running, trucks lurching forward, a searchlight snapping across the sky until it caught him and refused to let go. The beam pinned him in white. In that light, the fighter looked exactly like what it was, an enemy machine. The first tracers rose again, brighter now, climbing in short, angry lines. The rounds cracked past his wings. One passed so close he felt the air slap the canopy. He didn't look back. He didn't dodge. He forced himself to keep coming, because any sudden move would look like an attack. He dropped the rest of his flaps and eased the nose down. The FW-190 wanted speed. It always wanted speed. It was built for diving, for striking, for leaving wreckage behind it. Now he was asking it to do the opposite, to slow, to settle, to become harmless. Below, men took positions along the edge of the strip, rifles and machine guns raised. He could see their faces only as pale blurs, but he could imagine the fear in them. They had watched those silhouettes tear through friends before. They had seen what happened when you hesitated. He brought the wheels over the threshold. The tires hit hard and bounced once, and his heart nearly stopped. The aircraft lurched sideways. For a fraction of a second he pictured the worst ending, skidding into a fuel truck, flames blooming, his miracle turning into a disaster no one would ever forgive. He corrected, gently, and the FW-190 straightened. He stood on the brakes. The fighter shuddered, tires squealing, rolling forward in a long, tense line as the men on the ground tracked him with their weapons. He could feel their fingers tightening. He could feel the moment slipping away. He cut the throttle. Then he cut the engine. The sudden silence was shocking. The war outside didn't stop, but inside the cockpit the roar vanished as if someone had closed a heavy door. Only wind remained, whispering over the canopy. He shoved it open and climbed out slowly. Hands up first. High. Visible. No sudden movement. He stepped onto the wing like a man walking onto a stage he hadn't rehearsed for. The air was cold. His uniform was soaked. His arms ached from holding them up, but he didn't lower them. He shouted before anyone could decide what he was. I'm friendly. Don't shoot. For a moment, no one answered. Then a voice barked back, hard and afraid. Stay where you are. Boots pounded on the tarmac. Flashlights bobbed. A ring of weapons formed around him, muzzles steady, faces tense. These weren't villains. They were tired men doing the only thing war allowed, assuming the worst so they could live to see morning. A sergeant stepped closer, keeping his weapon trained on the pilot's chest. Name. He gave it. Unit. Squadron. Anything that proved he belonged under the sky. Another man, a mechanic, couldn't stop staring at the aircraft. He circled it wide, as if the machine itself might spring to life. Someone shone a light into the cockpit, searching for a second seat, a hidden charge, a trick. The officer who arrived next didn't look impressed. He looked furious. He stared at the captured fighter, then at the exhausted pilot beside it, and asked the only reasonable question. Are you out of your mind? Pilot swallowed. His voice was hoarse, but steady. Yes, sir. But I didn't have another way. That was the moment the rifles lowered, just a little. Not relief. Not celebration. Just the smallest crack in the fear. Later, they would question him for hours. They would inspect the FW-190 inch by inch, treating it like a prize and a threat at the same time. They would argue about whether the pilot was reckless or brilliant, whether the risk had been worth it, whether anyone else would have dared. But on that night, under the floodlights, the truth sat quietly on the runway. A man had survived the enemy, only to gamble his life against his own side's instincts. Because in aerial war, identity could vanish in a silhouette. And sometimes the hardest journey wasn't getting out. It was making it back without being mistaken for the thing everyone was trained to destroy. If you want more true wartime stories where survival depends on split-second choices, listen closely to the next one, because it begins with a pilot who steps into the wrong cockpit on purpose. And if this story held you until the end, subscribe for more World War aviation documentaries, and leave a comment with the aircraft you want to hear about next.